All right, now we get to start to look at what all of this stuff, the science stuff, thinking, all of these kinds of revolutions, how this actually really had an impact on the world. And it had an impact on the world mainly because Europe's now going to go out and start to occupy different areas in different ways. Before we get started, one of the things I would ask you to do if you can is please go in and do your midterm evaluation of this class. Those are really valuable to me, and so if you can, go in, find that link on your portal, and do an eval of this class. That would be wonderful. But one of the things we want to look at, and this really struck me as I was reading this chapter in Ferguson, is that the models or the patterns that the different countries use throughout the world are very different. And the difference in those patterns then really created a difference in what happened in those, what were to become different countries. So in some countries we're going to have colonies, which are going to be areas that are controlled. We were obviously a colony by usually a European nation. But that's not the only way you can do things. Next week we're going to look at the different forms of imperialism, because imperialism has this broader sense. And you can have colonies, but you can also have different things like spheres of influence. But who inhabits those colonies is also key to understanding what happens. And I think you see that when you see the difference between North America and South America and the radically different paths in history. When we do look at, this is actually a language map of the Americas, and it's really convenient because in looking at this language map you are also more or less looking at the patterns of colonial control, because of course the languages that those different European countries brought are then impacted or imprinted on those places, and so that is why when we go to Mexico we speak Spanish, but then if you're traveling throughout South America you're going to be mostly Spanish, and then if you cross over into Brazil all of a sudden, holy cow, we've got Portuguese. Traveling through Canada is particularly interesting. Here in the Northeast Kingdom we hear a lot of French, and obviously Canada is no longer connected to France, but of course this portion just north of us was for a long time. But we are going to be looking at the different patterns in different places, and so obviously what happens in South America, and we're going to be looking at the import of the Africans into these areas, and then of course into North America as well. And we're mostly talking about producing things that are either much easier to produce here and then shipping them back, or producing things that we found here and were just really, really great. We're going to go down to Africa primarily next week and look at what happens in Africa, because there especially the impact is lasting and very real. But we're going to see as we go through this is Europe taking all of the things that we've been talking about in the weeks leading up to this and bringing them out. So education is going to be exported out. This, even what we call the European model of education, is going to be exported out. We're going to be thinking about technology, and some of you wrote in the science issue very much about warfare. Without the scientific revolution, we wouldn't have had the technology that allowed Europe to dominate, because that was, in many ways, was very much a war dominance. This is the Maxim gun. I think you actually see the Maxim gun if you ever watched the Tom Cruise movie Samurai. I think it's a Maxim gun at the end that gets all the samurai. The wacko thing is that, and there's a wonderful little book on this, one of the things that kept Europeans out of Africa for a very long time was malaria. And coincidentally, because the Europeans come to South America, they find the cure for malaria. It's the quinine in this bark of a tree, and then are able to use what they find in South America then to dominate Africa. And it of course takes a couple of years for that to happen. I mean, hundreds of years. But at the same time, you're seeing the benefits of their occupation of one area translating into their occupation of another area. And then later in Africa, we're going to see them really, what they're doing in Africa is not so much growing things to export. They're going to be truly just taking what the Africans have. And of course, these are the great diamond and mineral mines. We're going to look at the rubber plantations, the Congo. They're going to take those resources. Remember, Europe is tiny and doesn't have much, and we're going to bring it out. And what's going to allow us to bring it out? Well, that's their advanced science and technology, and of course the industrial components of that as well. I do want you to watch as we do this, though. What fuels a lot of this is this aspect of nationalism, that we want to go there because we don't want the French to go there. We don't want the French to get rich. And so we're going to continue to have these little battles and competition that we had in Europe, and now we're just going to spread them out throughout the world. And this, I think I'm going to save till next week. So have a great week, and I hope you all had a wonderful 4th of July.